What are we discussing on today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast? Are we about to get a monster home run season from Corbin Carroll? And what if we get second half a Eugenio Suarez in 2025?
You are Locked on Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. You're listening to who? The always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas, multimedia journalist and I'm a graphic designer. So please go check out my website, millardthomas24.myportfolio.com. On there you can see all my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. On today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, we're going to be discussing Zac Gallen's spring training debut. Are we about to see a monster home run season from Corbin Carroll? And what if we get second half a Eugenio Suarez in 2025? So a whole lot I want to talk to you guys about today. But first, I want to say thank you for making Locked on Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free. It's available on all platforms. So please continue to tell your friends. And one of those platforms is YouTube. Please hit subscribe to Locked on Diamondbacks on YouTube. Now let's get into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast and let's discuss Zac Gallen's spring training debut, because we finally got to see the D-backs ace or number two ace adjacent. I don't know how to describe Zac Gallen anymore with Corbin Burnes now in the rotation. Zac Gallen still an ace. He just may not be the D-backs number one starter anymore, which is still crazy to think about because we felt like Gallen was probably the most underrated number one starter the last 3 years entering the regular season. I made a case like, yeah, any regular season, he can win the Cy Young. Now he's the D-backs number two starter entering 2025. Crazy to think about. And of course, when you have an ace, what is their job? To deliver big wins, especially in the face of adversity, because the D-backs so far through their first three spring training games, 0 for 3. But with their ace, Zac Gallen on the mound, they were able to get back to their winning ways and get their first win of spring training. Now, was it a great Zac Gallen start? No. He did have 2 strikeouts, which I liked. Did give up a home run, which you don't want to see in the first inning. But Zac Gallen is one of those guys where you're not really going to be too concerned with the result when it comes to spring training, because you can look at the underlying stats from today and you might say to yourself, oh my God, what happened to the velo of Zac Gallen? He was going out there only topping out at like 89, 90, 91 miles per hour. Like, he was not throwing very hard at all. Is this something that, as D-backs fans, should we be concerned about the lack of velocity that we saw in the spring training debut of Zac Gallen? No, we should not, because Gallen is one of those pitchers. Spring training is a time for experimentation and getting wild. And that's what Zac Gallen does in spring training. Might work on things he might not typically work on in the offseason, might try out new pitches, might just challenge himself. Like, Zac Gallen's one of those guys, spring training, he might be like, you know what? I'm only throwing fastballs in this inning. Or you know what? Maybe I only want to throw with my left hand. Obviously, he wouldn't do something that crazy, but Zac Gallen's the kind of guy to get zany during spring training. And we've seen a trend of him the last few years where you look at his velocity, those first couple spring training starts, and he's typically around 90 miles per hour. He was like that last spring training. But you know what? He got to the regular season and still averaged around 94 in his fastball. And second half, Zac Gallen, once he came back from injury, was actually hitting like new career highs in terms of like the fastest pitch thrown recorded throughout his career. So there's still potential where Zac Gallen can actually have a bump up in his velocity entering 2025. If stuff that we saw post-injury last year in terms of the velocity being a little bit higher than normal, if he can carry that into 2025, it could make him an even better pitcher. And as the number 2 starter with already Cy Young potential, I'm curious to see what a better version of Zac Gallen can look like behind a Corbin Burnes in the rotation. And so if you were at all worried about lack of velo, a home run given up by Zac Gallen, Do not be. He is the kind of pitcher to get zany during spring training, try things he normally wouldn't try during the regular season. And he's a guy, his track record shows you during spring training, velocity probably will dip a little bit, but it always goes back up once the regular season starts. So if you were at all concerned about Zac Gallen today, do not be. This rotation is still looking fully loaded come opening day. And right now, because of his start today, if you just did the math and work backwards, Zac Gallen would be in line to start opening day. Now, that would not surprise me at all. I think a lot of people are speculating, predicting it's going to be Corbin Burnes because of the money and him being, the new Cy Young pitcher in the rotation. But knowing Torey Lovullo and him being a pitcher, what is it? A player's coach, I guess is what I want to say. Knowing Torey Lovullo is a player's manager, Zac Gallen's the guy that started the last 2 opening days. He's been the guy that has been considered the ace for the D-backs. Even though come the postseason, Corbin Burnes might start game 1, he still might give Zac Gallen the nod of the opening day starter as a sign of respect for being the number 1 starter the last few years for the D-backs. Despite us signing Corbin Burnes to franchise record money, we still look at you as the face of the rotation. So Zach, you go out there and you start the first game of the season for us. I would not be surprised at all if Torey Lovullo did that and then come, when there's a break in the rotation, get it back to where Corbin Burnes is the number 1 starter. But I would not be surprised at all if opening day comes and Zac Gallen is on the bump. He is more than deserving of an opening day start. Then some other things from this game. Blake Walston, he still intrigues me. He's on the outside looking in for this bullpen right now and definitely the rotation. But he is high on my list of if D-backs have an injury in the rotation or if D-backs have an injury in the back end of the bullpen, he is high on my list of first man up. Him, Yulber Diaz, Christian Mena. There's a few guys that I really like on this D-backs team. And Walston being a lefty, if a Joe Mantiply or something or somebody like that, another lefty in the pen goes down, I like Walston a lot. Does he throw super hard? No, only average around 91.5 miles per hour on his fastball last season, but it was super effective. Opposing batters could not get hits. They had no power against his fastball last season, and so it was at least effective, and I think he has at least a nice mix of cutters, changeups, sweepers, curveballs. None of his stuff may be dominating, but he at least has a pretty deep arsenal, and he's not afraid to mix it up. He's not like Ryan Nelson, who's throwing, fastball 2/3 of the time. Blake Walston is not afraid to change it up at all. So he is very high on my first man list for this D-backs team. If there are any injuries to the rotation or the bullpen, is he the first man up that I have? No, but is he probably top 3 or top 4? Yeah, and especially among lefties, he's one of the first people up. And then for tomorrow, Tuesday's game, we got Joe Mantiply being the opener, starting the game for the D-backs. I don't hate even the idea of doing Mantiply opener come the regular season for guys like Monty and Erod, because let's say we start the season and either Monty or Erod are just bad. I mean, obviously you could just say, let's start Fott, let's start Ryan Nelson instead. But if the D-backs, again, want to get zany and do the Joe Mantiply, we're going to start you for an inning, and then we'll bring in Monty or Erod, so it feels a little bit different for them coming in the second inning. I guess I wouldn't hate that idea, but again, at that point, why wouldn't you just start Fott, Ryan Nelson, Gallen, Kelly, Corbin Burnes? You have so many better options, right? So still love Joe Mantiply. The opener thing could still be used some sort of way with the Monties and Erods. But again, if you're doing all that, why not just start the Fotts and the Ryan Nelsons of the world? Now we'll discuss, is Corbin Carroll incoming for a monster home run season in 2025? We'll talk about that in segment number 3.
From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. FanDuel is the app that is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly, no waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. My favorite thing to do on FanDuel is the same game parlay. Whenever the Suns are playing, give me KD over on 25 points, give me Booker over on 25, and give me the Suns money line. When it hits, which is not very often, it brings a big smile to my face. And if you want a big smile on your face, just visit fanduel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's fanduel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
Welcome into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, and let's get back into it and let's discuss Corbin Carroll and the potential for his monster home run season in 2025. If you like the show, please follow me on Twitter at CareerThomas24 for my personal account, or look up Locked on Diamondbacks about Twitter and Instagram for the podcast handle. Now, Corbin Carroll, we saw him in today's game, or I guess yesterday's game at the time of you guys listening to this podcast against the Cleveland Guardians. Corbin Carroll had a monster home run in the fourth inning, 423 feet off his bat. Was it hanging in the air and like I could have probably at least hit a double off it? Maybe. But I think the biggest thing from Corbin Carroll that you saw on that kind of play was his swing, how effortless it looked, how smooth it looked, and how it looked a little bit different, but still similar to last year. Sometimes when a guy struggles like he did, and it was only for a half last year, but sometimes when you see a great player like Corbin Carroll, have that fantastic rookie season, then the sophomore slump, sometimes they come back that third year and they try to change so many things about their stance and their tweaks and their mechanics. And sometimes it ruins their career. They end up going down this spiral hole. It's where you even get terms like the yips, because like you were so good at one point. Yes, you had a down year, but because you try to fix so many things about your game instead of just going back to what worked for you previously, you're now like a totally different player. You kind of like lost your way a little bit, and there could have been some of that concern, maybe some of that potential, even for a Corbin Carroll, with how much we discuss his swing, how much we discuss how flat it was. Like there could have been a world where he goes into the lab and he tries to reconstruct his whole swing where it just devastates his career. Like the Lonzo Ball's a broken jumper coming to the league where you reconstruct the whole thing and now you have one of the prettiest jumpers and you're a sniper. Like there's not that many cases in sports. There's a few in baseball where a guy reconstructed whole swing and then got better, but there's not many. And so Corbin was never going to go through a whole major reconstruction, but there was so much conversation about his swing and is it too flat and does he hit too many ground balls? And so I wouldn't have been surprised if some of that got into his head and he felt like he had to make some drastic and dramatic changes to how he approached pitches at the plate. And so he went to the offseason. He went to the lab and he did fix some things. Was it dramatic? Was it drastic? No, but the slight tweaks I think we're already seeing paying dividends, because previously when we looked at his last 2 years, when he held that bat, you could see the back head of that bat head was always flat, was always going toward his back and his bottom, right? You go look at old video of Corbin Carroll, go look at where that bat head is. It's facing toward his back, going in the direction toward his butt. But now when you look at that bat, it's a little bit more vertical, and it's so easy to visualize how much better or how much easier it's going to make his swing, because when he had it before, obviously he had to do a lot more of a flat swinging motion to get the bat head to the ball. But now because he keeps it a little bit more vertical, you get a little bit more of that golfing swing, get a little bit more of that launch angle now. And now Corbin Carroll takes a little bit of a different angle when he swings to that ball. And he already has the power in that small frame. Just the issue was last year, he was pounding it into the ground. But now with this slight tweak in his stance, he can still generate the power, but now the ball can leave the infield. And that's why we have to really be watchful of a monster home run season from Corbin Carroll with this new swing and stance, because of course the D-backs were the best offense in the league last year and they displayed so much power. Christian Walker with the Jock Peterson, with the Ketel Marte, like we had so much power in our lineup last year. And Corbin Carroll displayed a lot of power too, but only in the second half of 2024, because in the first half, he was terrible last season. He was one of the worst players in the sport. Him and Eugenio were two of the top 5 worst players according to WRC Plus in the sport last season, and it felt like a major sophomore slump. He was providing no sort of power. He had like 3 home runs in the first half of the season. Maybe not the first half, but like those first like 40 games, right? And then all of a sudden, after the All-Star break, he took off. The slugging was monstrous. He made a couple slight tweaks to his batting stance, his swing, and it improved his game so much more. And now, if he takes those tweaks from the offseason and we see that second half Corbin Carroll in 2025, that could be a guy that has a monster home run season and a guy that can definitely shoulder some of the workload of the guys that we just saw leave. With Jock Peterson gone, with Christian Walker gone, if Corbin Carroll, the 2024 second half of that guy, comes into 2025, that is a guy that can definitely make up the home run difference that we're going to be missing next season. Because if you remember, the Rookie of the Year season Corbin Carroll had in the first half, he was monstrous with home runs. 18 home runs in the first half. Guess what? Last year, in the second half, he had 17 home runs. If you combine the first half of 2023 for Corbin Carroll with the second half of 2024, it's 150 games, more than enough for a full game, for a full season sample size. That's 35 home runs. With knowing can also steal around 60 bases, if you get a 35 plus, 60 plus stolen base season from Corbin Carroll, that is so dynamic. That is going to help your lineup so much. And for a team that led the league in all the offensive categories last year, you get that version of Corbin Carroll next year. That's more than enough to make up the difference that you're losing in some of your Jocks and some of your Christian Walkers. Because even just the second half of Corbin Carroll last year, WRC Plus, 10th in the National League. He was a top 10 player in the NL post All-Star break, and that was all because of his power. And of course, when he has more power, it's going to lead to more opportunities on the bases, create more chaos. And for Corbin Carroll, the speed is still the biggest weapon he has. The fact that he can also hit 30 home runs potentially is just an added bonus. And so if we get that 30 to 35 home run potential again from Corbin Carroll, he's definitely going to be in that 50 plus stolen base range with it. And if you get all that mixed together, that is a guy that can be the face of your team, be a guy that can be an all-star, MVP candidate as well. With Jock Peterson gone, Christian Walker gone, the D-backs offense can be okay as long as what you saw from the second half of last year continues into 2025. We need that power surge to continue from Corbin Carroll. We can't have another half where he has less than double-digit home runs. Like, this D-backs offense will have to play too much into the small ball and the chaos if we do not have the power stroke back from Corbin Carroll. And so far, from what we've seen from spring training, what we've seen from the batting cage videos, makes me super optimistic that the power is still going to be there for him come 2025. So right now, if you're on FanDuel and you're looking at the over-under total for Corbin Carroll when it comes to his home runs, I would pound the over entering 2025. Now we'll discuss if you should pound the over on Eugenio Suarez's home run total in segment number 3. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. My favorite Wonderful Pistachios I actually have right here. Sorry to the audio listeners only. You're going to have to go to YouTube for this one because right next to me, I got 3 of my favorite flavors here. And this is what is great about Wonderful Pistachios. Unsalted right here, no shell. Chili roasted, no shell. And then this one is roasted and salted with the shell. The great thing about Wonderful Pistachios is the variety. You could get salted, unsalted, with shell, no shell. Get a little kick to it if you wanted to. No matter what flavor you want, they have a variety and a profile that fits just for you. So please go get yourself some Wonderful Pistachios. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, back here on the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, I want to discuss Eugenio Suarez. We just discussed if we get second half Corbin Carroll entering next season, the kind of power he could provide, the kind of offense he could provide with the Jocks and the Christian Walkers leaving. But he's not the only one in this D-backs lineup that had a second half where if he continues that next year, monster season. Because Eugenio, as good as Corbin Carroll was, with the 10th highest WRC plus in the second half, Eugenio from July on, which was again an 80 game sample size, quite literally was putting up Babe Ruth level numbers, which is insane to think about. But Suarez was going crazy in the second half of the season after being a guy. If you guys remember that first half of the season, by month 2, D-backs fans I was saying, should we straight up cut Eugenio Suarez? Should we trade him for anything? Like, we were all like, do whatever you can to get Eugenio off this roster, move him down in the lineup. And now entering next season, it's like we forgot all about the first half because all you can remember is what happened most recently. And most recently, those last 65 games of the year, hit a 307 average, a 942 OPS, and 20 home runs in just 65 games. Eugenio was crazy in the second half of last year. Again, third highest WRC plus in the National League from July on, just straight up putting on video game numbers. And if we get that guy, if we get second half Eugenio in 2025, it doesn't matter that we lost Jock Peterson. It does not matter that we lost Christian Walker. If you get Corbin Carroll hitting his 30 to 40 home runs, you get Eugenio already all of a sudden back to that guy that we saw prior to the pandemic. If you get pre-pandemic Eugenio, that is a different level of player. In the second half of last year, we got pre-pandemic Eugenio, but is that sustainable over the course of a full season? That is the biggest question mark because we had not seen the version that we saw in the second half last year in quite some time. His fastball slugging last year, or his slugging percentage against fastball last year, was very high, but still not as high as it was in 2019. But his collective slug on off speed plus breaking pitches, if you combine his slugging against both of those grouping of pitches, it was his highest since 2018, which is arguably his best season as a pro. The second half of last year was something that we haven't seen reminiscent of Eugenio since his 2018-2019 seasons when he was absolutely crushing pitches at the plate. Because Eugenio pre-pandemic, 2018, 283 average, 892 OPS, 34 home runs. 2019 Eugenio, 270 average, 930 OPS, 49 bombs, 103 RBIs. Was he still a strikeout monster in 2018, 2019? Yes. But if you're going to have a 900 OPS and 40 home runs over those 2 seasons, you'll take it. And last year, he still had almost like 800 OPS, still had 30 home runs. And that was because of the second half he had. Sometimes players go to Seattle and their offense dramatically falls off. Teoscar Hernandez, we saw it. He went to Seattle, was not as good. Goes back to the Dodgers, to the NOS, a better hitting ballpark. It becomes an all-star, wins the home run derby. Like, Seattle, for a lot of players, it's just not a hitter-friendly ballpark. And for Eugenio, it just could have been he needed a change of scenery for his offense to come back. This was still a guy who had 30 home runs in 2022, 2021. We might have just got him off a really down season. Was still a guy that is 791 OPS in 2022. 23 could have been the outlier down fluke season for Eugenio, and now being in Arizona, being in the heat, could bring his power all the way back. And so excited for Eugenio in 2025, because if you get the second half of last year over the course of a full year, again, that's a 40 home run player. And again, he had 20 home runs in just 65 games. So 162 games, that's about the same amount of home runs he had in 2019. I'm not sure if Eugenio could hit 40 home runs, but if he could get us maybe more home runs than he had last year, he had 30 last year. If he could get 35 this season, with Carroll getting 35 this season, Marte getting back to 35, and then just normal seasons from Josh Naylor, Gritchick, Jake McCarthy, just everyone else, give me an average season from you. I think this offense could be as good, if not better than last year, if you get the second half Eugenio and Corbin Carroll. And so very, very high on this offense still for the Arizona Diamondbacks entering 2025. Yes, we lost some big bats in the middle of the lineup. Christian Walker, he was a guy, 30 to 40 home run potential every single season. He's been consistent in the power department the last few years. He is going to be greatly missed. Jock Peterson, so clutch last season in that power department, late game situations, high leverage situations. Jock Peterson was a guy, when he got a hold of one, would straight up pimp it to the opposing crowd, to the opposing team. And I'm going to miss that moxie, but I think a guy like Josh Naylor is going to provide a lot of fun, a lot of spark to this offense, a lot of youth as well. Randall Grichuk, if he can continue what he did in September, that would be absolutely insane. Then Eugenio, Corbin Carroll, just it's hard to do because your second half was so good, but give me 90% of what you did in the second half in 2024. And I think this D-backs offense in 2025 can be even better than what it did last season. Now, that's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back tomorrow for more Diamondbacks news coverage and insight. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Deuces.